Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. And this week, we get to talk to another Tristan. I want to welcome to the show Tristan Toleno, who has been a representative for Wyndham 9, aka one of three reps from Brattleboro, since 2012. He is currently serving on the House Committee on Appropriations and the State Workforce Development Board. And he will be serving out his term until the beginning of January. However, we're here to talk next steps because after many, many years, well, more than a decade, you will be stepping down. And we're going to miss you, Tristan. It's been fun because I was a fairly newbie reporter when you became a newbie lawmaker. So it's been a
Well,
while.
I think that's a fancy way of saying we're getting old, but I will.
Well, maybe you are. I'm not, but you
Yeah,
know.
okay, fair enough. Yes. No, it's been an extraordinary 12 years, and it's been meant the world to me to be in this role and to serve the community and serve the state in all the different ways that I've been able to do it. And yeah, I love being here. Love talking about what's going on, and also, what it's like to serve, and wherever we go. It's great to be here. Uh, we commented earlier that it's also a really strong allergy morning, and I'm definitely feeling it. I can hear it in my voice, but so sympathy to all the listeners who are also experiencing the blizzard of pollen that has been rocking our worlds this week.
Oh,
I don't quite have a
I'm right there
radio
with you.
voice, but it's definitely lowered my register.
Well, supposedly that's the better voice for radio, anyways.
Mhm.
So you're probably nailing the radio audience this morning
Or
there.
getting closer anyway. I'm still probably pretty high, but
Well, I want to start, Tristan, just cast your mind way back when. And I'm always interested in why people choose to serve in the state house to begin with, because it isn't, well, I'm sure some people dial it in, I
Mhm.
guess, but I don't really see how it's something you could dial in very easily. So I'm curious, what made you want to step forward to begin with?
That's a good question. And I don't know. Wow. Let me think back here. So uh I was lucky in that I had direct experience of some of the people who had served in my district in the same, in the same role. So my father-in-law, who died now 6 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, Don Webster, served one term in 2000. I think he was 2000 to 2002. And, he and I spent a lot of time talking about politics over the decade that I was running the restaurant, and it overlapped with running the restaurant that he was a partner in, kind of overlapped with his term, and then he chose to run for the Senate. Uh,
Oh, that's right.
so he was there the first biennium after um, the the retaliation, if you will, against the civil unions vote. And so the Democrats were in a minority, and it was a pretty tough environment in the House for Democrats. And he really loved the work. He loved being there. He loved doing it. But the Senate was a Dem majority, and it was just an easier uh, environment to work. And there were two open seats, and so he ran for it, and he ended up losing. It ended up being a very large contested primary, and he ended up losing the primary by 26 votes.
Oh,
To Jeanette and to Rod Gander. Uh, and at that time, it was still possible, what we call in the legislative term or legislative language, two bites at the apple. He ran as an independent for his House seat.
Mm.
and his uh, he had he came in because he wasn't in the primary. He came in to a situation where Sarah Edwards had won the write-in for the Democrats as well as the progressive nomination.
Oh, that's right.
And
Yeah.
so he was on the ballot as an independent, and Sarah was on the ballot as a progressive and Democrat. And there was in that general election also Lynn Quorum running as a Republican, and so he lost that election. However, Sarah Edwards is the mother of my half brother and half sister, and was my stepmother for my most of my childhood, and into my senior year in high school. And so, uh, we were also close, and so I watched and sort of saw what she was doing for 10 years,
Mhm.
um, and at one point, several years before she ended up deciding she was done, she asked if I would ever be interested, and I said, actually, yes. And
Mm.
that was really the full extent of it for several years. But it coincided for me with a period of my life where I was running the restaurant and learning a lot about what to do and not to do, and how hard it is to run a small business like
Mm.
that, and major managerial boot camp, because I was the day-to-day manager, and in the summer I had 75 employees, and we were open 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, and it was like, it was big. It was a big uh, endeavor. It was hard, and it was incredibly challenging. But actually, at the same time, I've been really involved in the local food movement. Uh,
Mhm.
Farm to School was getting started, and I was advisor to Farm to School. I was, working with the Career Center as an advisor on their culinary training program. I was uh, on the board and then the chair of the board of the Vermont Fresh Network, which is a chef farmer distributor collaborative that was designed to try to boost um, the local food, and I'd been a part of its founding when I was in culinary school. And so, I was involved in all of these little pockets, and then I had some some employees of color who were experiencing just a lot of attention from Brett PD, and
Mm.
I was and I found out that the Civilian Police Communications Committee, after 10 years, was uh, being considered um, for being removed from the town's process
Right,
by
right.
the select board. And I got on that because I was concerned about the equity issues at the time. And so I was starting to do all of that. And then I also got my MBA from Marlboro around sustainability at that time. And so looking at larger policy issues around climate and sustainability resilience. And so all of that was converging in a way that said to me, this is interesting. And I think I might like to try to pull all of this together in and be a part of Vermont's political system when Sarah chooses not to run. And then, um, right, it was basically as I was preparing to head into my graduation from Marlboro, we closed the restaurant and I started a little catering operation. And I realized the catering operation would allow me, in theory, to sort of work full time in the summer and fall and part time in the winter. And so it would be a good vehicle to try to run for the legislature with that. And
Mhm.
so when Sarah announced her retirement, she actually endorsed me, and I announced my campaign the same day. And I had a primary opponent. It was Kate O'Connor, and I
Oh,
ran against
that's right.
each other. Kate had come back uh, after Howard Dean's um, run for president and back to Brattleboro, and it was a very interesting dynamic.
Mhm.
We're good, but it was like it was a some people the snarky political reporter at the time at 7 Days, who a legend, and it was wonderful. He like wrote about us as a clash of dynasties because
Oh, yes.
Kate's father was the former Speaker of the House,
Mhm.
first Democratic Speaker of the House from this district, and a local legend. And Kate had worked with Dean, and Dean was supporting Kate, and then the governor. inexplicably decided to endorse in the primary, which never happens, and endorsed Kate. And it was like this, and then my father-in-law's former stepmother, and so it was kind of funny. I mean, it didn't feel really honestly like any kind of dynasty, but there was layers of connection. My father-in-law had been a commissioner. I don't know, he was commissioner secretary actually, I think, of commerce in Governor Salmon's campaign way back, or governor's term, and he'd been Governor Salmon's campaign manager. So like there was, I think he and Tim had gone to Boys State at high school together, and the first house that Tim and Martha owned when they were a married couple is my house. Um, I mean, it was just like the layers were. It was highly entertaining. Um,
You'd like need a map. If this, then here, go here.
but it was a combination of, I don't know if it would have occurred to me as easily if I hadn't had some sense of what the job was and what was going on, combined with the fact that it was in my mind that I could work on the local food system work at the state level,
Mhm.
and uh, and that my life had changed in a way with the catering that allowed me to think of myself as having kind of seasonal roles, which the legislature structurally is really designed around. It's an
Yeah.
frankly archaic uh, model that, in its current modern form, makes it extraordinarily hard on people who are of working age, who
Yeah.
have to maintain some sort of career pathway. And I'm sure we can cover that, but it comes from a time when, people,
Farming?
what's that? Farm.
Farming?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
comes from the farming era when it was like there wasn't a whole lot happening in the winter, and you could go spend 10, 12 weeks in Montpelier and represent your local community. And they were, every town had a rep, and it was just a different model.
Hmm. Yeah, we forget that at one point every single town had a rep rather than us having districts. It's rather fascinating. Um, so I'm curious, you know, even though you went into the job probably having a better handle on it than a lot of people because of Sarah and because of Dawn. Um, I'm curious though, when you went in with all your hopes and dreams and plans,
Yep.
and then you get into reality,
Yep.
as we all have those transitions, and we must grapple with them as well as we can. What was that like? What changed for you? And what did you learn kind of along the way?
Yeah, a lot. I'll tell two quick stories I think that are part of my learning. One came later when I was in the leadership team for 4 years, and sort of the middle of my legislative career was on the leadership team. I remember a rep who came in who, uh, in his campaign in a primary, he said, I'm I know how this place works, and you can count on me to be kind of able to move quickly and really get it. And he'd worked for Leahy, and he was very active in politics and paid a lot of attention and was, a businessman. And I remember him saying, "I had no idea how this place worked." He thought he did. He thought he was telling. I mean, he wasn't lying,
Mhm.
but he got there and he was like, "This is not at all what I thought it is." And um, so that's one story, and I'll try to stitch these all together. But I remember in the first month of being in the legislature, I tended to work in the evenings in the building. I still do. I mean, I have all throughout my career, but I was kind of in that rhythm, going to dinner with people and then coming back, or hanging out. And there was one evening where one of my committee mates, Will Stevens, who became a really good friend, um, was we were hanging out and after dinner, and he introduced me to the chair of commerce, Bill Botso. And Bill came into the room. We were in our ag room, and he said hi, and he introduced himself. And in a rookie mistake, I was like, "Oh, I have an issue," and started to like lay it all out there. And Bill was a gentle giant. He was like 6'5", very like a statesman, very gentle demeanor, a sculptor in his outside of the legislature work, and but like a maniac for the grinding work of regulating banking and insurance and all these other things. He was like just so detail oriented and so attentive to that work. But he
Mm.
said to me, he's like, "Well, seems like you have it all figured out." And then he wandered off back down the hallway, and I thought, "Uh-oh, I did that wrong." uh, and what I quickly realized, and that was like the thing that I needed to sort of wake up to was um, how policy was important and we were passionate about it, but we had to be in good relationship with each other. Uh,
Mm.
First and foremost is to get to know people, and I committed myself to get to know people, to understand what they cared about, understand what they were worried about, understand what their districts were worried about, just stay in that that relationship building work. And
Mhm.
so I also, I committed myself to learning my committee work as well. I was in the ag committee, and our big thing that year, we tried to do the GMO labeling bill.
Oh, I remember that.
And so, that was fun. And the the person in the committee who was going to be the lead on the floor, uh, when we did it on the floor, started to flounder. And our committee chair had been the majority leader, and she was all over the place scripting us and trying to support us on how to do it. And she was like, "Tristan, take over." I'm like, "Okay." And so I jumped in, and so got kind of a sense of the floor dynamics, and also how to like aware that I was prepared, like I'd done my work. And even though I wasn't expected to be the primary speaker, I was expected to play a role. But I ended up the next day taking over as the primary on the second day of the debates. And so I started to find my footing, both in where I was able to be really clear about particular issues and articulate them in a way that, I could help people understand what was going on, but also illustrate the distinction of what we were choosing to do,
Mhm.
combined with what I was learning about the relationships. I had a colleague in the ag committee at one point say, "How do you know all of this? How have you figured all of these things out? I've been here for 3 years and I don't know any of that." And the difference is that I was talking to everybody. And,
Mm.
while I love this person's a little bit, introverted. Well, no, extraordinarily introverted, and a little bit, you know, deficient on some of the social skills. And good earnest legislator, but not necessarily um, as attuned to the subtleties of what's happening in the dialogue that you're in with people all the time.
Mm. Mhm.
And so, because that turned out to be a strength of mine,
Mhm.
uh, I didn't know that it would be a strength when I got there, but it turned out to be a strength of mine, to be uh, able to pull a lot of information together from all of those interactions, and know what it meant.
Right.
Um, and it was why by the end of my third year, I was being approached as a future member of the leadership team. In my fourth year, I was the juniorest member of SHAP's leadership team.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
in my fifth year, I was the assistant majority leader. And it was because of that, the acumen around the relationships and the conversations and what I could distill from that. But I didn't know when I went there that that's what would be kind of my strength. I thought I was going to go and work on local food and, work
Right.
on like specific things, and it evolved in response to the dynamics that are actually there.
So I have a comment, but I just want to quickly, so we're not too inside baseball for people. So when Tristan said Shap, he meant Shap Smith, the
Oh, thank
former
you.
Speaker of the House. And when he's talking about being the primary, uh, lawmakers do work within committees on concentrated topic focused work. But then when they develop a bill, they have to take it to the floor, to the entire House, and then defend it and debate it. And so being the primary is the main person who stands up and does that.
Mhm.
Um, so just a quick little, very short crib notes
Thank
there.
you. Thank you.
But in a way, Tristan, I'm not surprised in your ability to kind of work with relationships and take in a lot of information at once, because you did work in a restaurant for so long, where you're watching food and you're taking orders and you're watching the wait staff and it's kind of Grand Central Station traffic control at all times. So I can imagine that shifting to information and relationships is actually not that big a leap.
No, and and I think if you probed a little bit with me at that time as I was transitioning into the legislature, I probably would have acknowledged that the years in the restaurant industry, that what my strength was as a manager was actually the relationships.
Hmm.
Um, the restaurant was a big operation, and as I said, there were a lot of employees. And if, in a typical summer season when I had 75 employees, it was rare to have more than 15 or so of them over the age of 21.
Hmm.
And so a lot of young people, and and I paid a lot of attention to what was going on in their lives, what their needs were, in the kitchen itself. The This is my theory of kitchen life, so I apologize if this is too much of a distraction, but
My
you know,
dad used to own a restaurant, so
yeah.
for me,
Well,
no.
so there's like, I wasn't in the kitchen full time. Well, I mean, I was technically, but if you count it as like 40 hours a week, I was there more than that.
Hmm.
But I wasn't there every hour that I was in the restaurant, because I was also basically I was the operating partner. I did all the financials and budgeting and ordering and pay, scheduling and all of those things. I did all of that. But I spent a lot of time in the kitchen, and I also was very intentional. Like, I'd walk through the kitchen and I try to, even just walking through the kitchen, I try to get a read on what the vibe was,
Hmm.
and so I honed my reading ability of body language, and could start to see the warning signs of when the kitchen was on edge. And
Hmm.
um and what I didn't really understand, but I started to get a better sense of over time, was like, oh, not only could I see it, but if I spent 15 minutes in the kitchen in a certain way, I could often, uh, very often, sort of turn the energy of the
Hmm.
kitchen into a little bit better coherence. And now, in the work that I do now, when I'm not in the legislature, I work for a company, Global Roundtable Leadership in Keene,
That's,
that
yeah, I want
we
to ask
we
you that.
work on team development,
Hmm.
and and about how teams share power and leadership and kind of center their humanity. And when I'm looking back, I'm like, wow, that's what I was doing at the restaurant, centering people's humanity and really focused on the team dynamics, and trying to support healthy team dynamics. And there's lots of ways that people have named it. Like, there's a bunch of research that talks about the state of flow. Um, there's the French esprit de corps. There's like high functioning. There's lots of words, jargon words that we apply to it. But if anybody has been a part of a musical ensemble or a sports team or a theater production, like, when a team is in a high state of coherence with each other, you can feel it. Like,
Hmm.
people know it. And the
It's
question,
actually quite a buzz, having
it is
worked
quite a
on
buzz,
theater.
right? And
Yeah.
so the question is, like, how does that happen?
Mm.
How, and what we say in our work from our experience and our, our research, is that it's that's like an emergent quality that comes out of the way that people relate to each other. But strong relational leadership in those kinds of spaces is going to be better at cultivating that feeling and flow than people who are not attuned. And so I was practicing that for the 15 years in food service before that without even knowing it. Get to the legislature, guess what? The legislature is the same way. It's people trying to do good work, trying to represent their individual communities, trying to, figure out what their role is. Like, are they important? Are they not important? What does that mean? And how do I get anything done? And it's, you will, I and others always say it's a relationship driven place, but people don't necessarily, well, what does that mean? And
Hmm.
what it means is, like if you can't follow everything, you can't know everything, so how do you develop the kind of relationship where somebody who's in a position where they are influential or they can help you get up to speed, and then you figure out also, who do I intervene with? Who will listen to my idea or my feedback on this particular thing, who's in a position to do something about it? And all of that, and how do they find me trustworthy? Well, that they're not going to just listen. you know all legislators are getting bombarded with information from people who want to convince them that
Yeah.
that piece of information is correct and they should act on it. And
And
most of the
guess
people
what?
who are
It's the
doing that
same
are
in
paid to.
journalism too. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
I cut you off.
No, no, that absolutely the same in journalism, right? And you have to figure out, well, which is true, what do I believe? And when we're moving at the pace that we're moving in the legislature, it's if you have a trusted relationship with somebody, if you have confidence in their likelihood of being accurate or on point, or they know how to show up in your world and give you an actionable piece of information,
Mhm.
you're going to have more influence. And I think it's not unlike tending to the energy of a kitchen crew or an executive team, and they're very similar through threads. And so it was just learning that was what brought me the most alive, was where my career, if you will, in the legislature evolved. So
Mm.
I went I did an interesting journey. I did the 2 years in agriculture. My second year in ag, Shap, Speaker of the House, was pushing for the bill that would eventually, in the next biennium, become Act 46.
Oh, okay.
And I realized, I was like, I don't think this is smart. This way, the way
Hmm.
that they were approaching it, I was like, I don't like this is not smart. And I rallied my friend Will Stevens and another friend, Chip Conquest, and the three of us, we jokingly called ourselves the Three Amigos, but we worked our caucus and the independents and some of the Republicans, and we put up enough resistance that that Chap wasn't able to get that accomplished in year two.
Hmm.
And then he redesigned his committee structure, new chair, new people on the committee, new mission, if you will, brought in some people from Ways and Means, so because he was like, we're going to do this. And uh, that second biennium, I had enough wisdom at that point to understand, okay, the speaker's using all of his power to get it done. I'm not going to win this year. So what do I want to do instead? Like, how do I want to be a part of the conversation and shape it? And so, I spent a lot of time on that, but Act 46 did pass.
Hmm.
I voted against it, and I said I'm not against consolidation. I'm concerned about the methodology of the incentives and the fact
Right.
that instead of focusing on what's happening in the classroom and how we improve that to have a real world-class education system, we're going to spend 5 years fighting about governance, and at the end of the day, we're probably going to have to do it again, and it's not going to look very different than the system that we had before.
Mm.
I would say that largely played out.
Mm.
Um, that the communities, and I have different language for it now, but the communities that moved quickly to take advantage of the tax savings, um, were already the successful communities mostly that were ready to kind of self-organize,
Right, right.
and that all the communities that had school choice or were not as successful already in their governance really struggled with Act 46. I did not vote against it because I thought that the Brattleboro area was going to have a problem,
Mhm.
because our supervisory union at that time was very coherent with each other, I thought. Turned out that we became one of the hotbeds of resistance of the implementation of Act 46, and it's had a lot of. I mean, Marlboro is not in our supervisory union, but that's my hometown.
Right.
They wanted to protect their middle school,
Mhm.
and to the point that they weren't able to. They couldn't find a way to be a part of a new system in compliance with the law. We ended up modifying Act 46 in a way that allowed them to sort of affiliate with somebody, but the current consequence for them is that their tax rates are going up extraordinarily high,
Yeah.
um and so it, that, like, that was a, a trajectory of sort of starting to understand that I could use my relational strengths to influence in the direction I thought I needed to go, but also that I started to understand the larger picture of how power and process work happens in the building, in certainly in
Mm.
the house. And so by the end of my second biennium, Shap had invited me to be the juniorest member of his leadership team.
Okay. Well, Tristan, unfortunately, we need to stop there because we have to hear from some underwriters. But thank you for what you were sharing about power and policy and process. I think that's very intriguing, and so thank you for that. Hey, folks, we're going to hear from some underwriters on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and if you're just joining me, I'm speaking with Representative Tristan Toleno. I know he was on the show not too long ago, but we were actually talking workforce, which is what Tristan and I often talk about.
Mhm.
But now we're talking about his life in the legislature because he is one of a couple lawmakers in Windham County who have chosen not to run again. One of three, I think.
Um,
So we're kind of getting some life stories here, huh, Tristan?
we are. Yes, it's been a fun ramble through the past, if you will.
Well, before we dive back into the State House, I just want to remind people that BCTV does beautiful work
Mm.
taking the video version of this show and sharing it with other stations around Vermont. So thank you, BCTV, for all you do. And remind folks that you can subscribe to us wherever you find your podcasts and that the views and opinions of the happy hour are those of the hosts and the guests and nobody else. Not even the very cute little dog that is asleep on Tristan's foot right now that you can't see, but is definitely there, adding to the vibe of today's show. So,
You have
Tristan,
very strong opinions about lots of things.
I notice house pets tend to. um, in the first half of the show, we were talking about your early days at the State House and how you came to serve and how you started to learn more about leadership and the culture of a place. And in your day job life, we'll call it, you are a member of Global Solutions Roundtable Leadership Organization, an organization that does just this.
Mhm.
In um, sorry, someone was coming down my driveway. I didn't recognize them, but now I do. Um, and you work on the culture and leadership styles of organizations. So I'm curious, one thing that's so amazing about the State House are the relationships that are built
Mhm.
and how much people work to make sure that things are built on a very personal level between lawmakers. But I can imagine that has some downsides too, because you can possibly get into things like groupthink or things like that, to use some jargon. So I'm curious, from your professional day job point of view, what does the culture of the State House tell you around leadership and the type of culture it has
Um,
for power, I guess I should say, around power?
yeah, and I'm Sorry if I look like I'm distracted. To possible watchers, I was looking for a quote that I really like. Mm.
That's okay. I got weird people coming
Oh,
down my driveway. You're looking for quotes. We're just
it's
rolling
like
with it.
actual life. My goodness. So first, I would say that there are layers of different cultures that are interacting with each other in the State House, and then that's really important
Mhm.
for people to understand. And I'll start with the most obvious, which is that the House and the Senate are very different.
Mm,
Um, and they're structurally very different, but then the culture is very different. And so I'll start with the Senate. The Senate is 30 individuals. They have much larger districts. They tend, because they have much larger districts, those districts tend to be um, uh, a mix of
mhm,
like, you know, town centers and rural communities and more conservative communities and more liberal communities. And so even in Windham County, where we are generally among the most liberal places in the country, there's a wide variation within Windham County. And a senator who represents the Windham County has to kind of steer towards something that feels representative of everyone, that and is likely to reflect the electorate in some way. So, leaning progressive, but not monolithically so.
mm,
And
mhm.
then the Senate has they have to serve in two committees because they don't have enough bodies to populate the committees. So senators have a morning committee and an afternoon committee.
Right, right.
Um, and half of them are in leadership of committees because they need chairs and vice chairs and ranking members and all of those committees. And so, everybody has there's different types of roles. And culturally, um, it's a little bit more like, like I'm going to use the word horse trading as if I think I know what that means, but that it's the culture allows individual senators to act more as individuals. uh,
Hmm.
they,
Interesting.
like they can go to a colleague, on approps and say, you know, this bill that we're working on that you care about, I'm carrying this water for you, and I need you to help me with getting this particular ask into the budget. And then they make those kinds of agreements much more easily
Hmm.
because there's only 30 of them. They're on all of these cross-cutting roles, and they have to pick and choose, what they can do and what they can't do. So it's a little bit it looks like 30 freelancers more historically more than it does like a tight system of party affiliation or any kind of leadership activity. They
Hmm.
have a majority leader now who's pretty active, but she spent 10 years in the House before she went there. And she's bringing a little bit more of the House culture and coherence to the majority caucus in the Senate, which is the Democrats. But that's in my 10 year or 12 years there, that is not necessarily normal for them.
Mhm.
On the House side, we're 150 people, and it's just fundamentally different to have to try to find a process that works for 150 people.
So,
And yeah,
so
go
in
ahead.
other words, you got horse traders in the Senate and cat wranglers in the House?
Well, it's more, it becomes more tribal. Um, that you're on
Okay.
team D, team R, team P, or team I,
Uh-huh.
um, and it's so you spend a there's a lot more support for bringing coherence to the caucus system,
Hmm.
um, because you need it.
Mhm.
If you have the current balance of power is the most asymmetric I think it's ever been in history, actually. So the Dems have 105 of the 150, I think, or something, and then there are four progs.
Mhm.
And so, and the progressives don't caucus with the Democrats, but often align on votes.
Mhm.
Um, but the whole notion of caucusing is really important to the way that the House functions and not important in the Senate in the same way. Um,
Interesting.
and and again, it's because it's just different when you're managing 80 to 100 people in the majority caucus. It's just a different beast to try to help support 80 people to be intentional about their activities together. And how do they do that? And
Mhm.
so, how do you share information across 80 to 100 people in a way that people can align to its alignment with the values of the party that they represent, with their own home community's needs, and then to their relationships and their desire to be a part of a successful system.
Mhm.
And uh, so, go
Well,
answer your question. Go
oh,
ahead.
I was just going to say, and I can imagine too, there's also just that very practical level of how do you make sure it doesn't turn into a game of telephone where you start with one message and by the time it's gone through 80 to 100 people, it is now something else. I can imagine on a practical level, that's pretty difficult as well.
It's very difficult, and it's why the House Majority Caucus has multiple people on the leadership team, because you need um, it's a full-time job year round for the House Majority Leader,
Mhm.
and a full-time job in the building for the whip, the Assistant Majority Leader, who is the traditional vote counter role. And then in the current, most recent years, the House Democrats have also had two other assistant majority leaders, one focused on communications, which is really mostly about what you just named, which is helping to pull together a coherent body of information for the members to be able to communicate what we are collectively doing. Um,
Mhm.
and then, if you will, like a second whip or second support system for understanding what's going on in the caucus. And um, I've been weaving my legislative bio kind of into this response system, and I said that, I think before the break, that my fourth year I started to be pulled in as the junior most member of the leadership team, and at the time we were structured differently, but I was like the deputy of deputy of to the deputy or something, you know. Um, and but in year five I became the assistant majority leader and whip for the House Democrats, and it was when Mitzi was speaker, and now the current speaker, so Mitzi Johnson was elected speaker from she came out of the appropriations committee leadership role there, and was elected speaker. And Joe Kowinski, who's the current speaker, was the majority leader, and Emily Long, who's the current majority leader, was with me in that sort of second assistant majority leadership role, tied to vote counting and kind of caucus stewardship. Um, and so when you say to people, "Oh, I'm the whip," they're like, "Oh, you twist arms." Well, in Congress, maybe that's the way it works, although I doubt
Mhm.
it. I think that's more the myth.
Mhm.
Um, but the whip role, in my experience of it, is mostly about knowing what members are going through, knowing
Mhm.
what they don't know, knowing what issue, what way of understanding a particular bill will support them to make a decision, and knowing when that's not a good decision for their home community. Have they had a chance to influence it in a way so that they at least can go home and say, here's what I advocated for, on behalf of our community. I didn't win that argument, but I supported the final result, or I didn't.
Mhm.
And there's times when certainly when the majority caucus votes against, some members vote against the majority, on any given issue. Um, but it's really about bringing that coherence inside of the system, more than it is any kind of power over.
Mhm.
It's not that there's no power over, there's some, it's not that there's nothing, but it's not the primary way that the House functions. The primary way that at least the majority caucus, in this case the Democrats, function is around um, collaborative alignment,
Mhm.
and taking the time to do all of the steps in the communication so that people feel informed and aware of what they're doing. And
Mhm.
there's a strong, I called it tribal as well, and there's a strong tribal, alliance in the
Mhm.
sense of like you want to be part of your group and you want to be with your group when you can be with your group. And sometimes it's very, very hard to break out of that and vote against your group. But it's
Right.
not so much because there's any direct retaliation as it is, human beings are social. We have a long history in our evolutionary history of of being successful by sticking together.
Yeah.
Um, and it's no different in a political system where it's this big. Sticking together is and being coherent together is where the strength, collective strength, comes from. And so it's always hard to break out of that to say no on any given issue. But when it happens, it's almost always tied to how people perceive the needs of their local community as having some divergence from what the majority is heading towards.
Mhm.
Occasionally, it's individuals who just simply can't get to yes on something. I was the vote counter for the two steps that we made to legalize marijuana. So the first step we made was to completely decriminalize
Right.
small scale cultivation at home and just let people, like, that was the sort of the hands off libertarian approach was step one. And then step two was the world hasn't ended. We have this system. Can we now raise tax revenue and actually regulate this so that we can bring successfully bring in what had been a large scale, not so much cottage industry, but cottage industry in the secret in
Mhm.
Vermont, bring it in from the cold, if you will, into a regulated system and preserve our ability to regulate it well, to have small scale businesses and not sort of be dominated by the large out of state private equity funded mega operations. And
Mhm.
we've largely been successful at doing that. Um, but in the process, the first vote, we had I think 86 Democrats that year and 6 or 7 progs, and we only got 79 votes on that bill.
I
And,
remember that being a tough one.
so it was a nail biter. And actually, we brought it to the floor early in the session, and this is not supposed to happen, but it did happen. While it was on the floor, members who had told me prior that they were yeses were changing their votes.
Ooh.
And one of the things that we always say in leadership is like it's okay to be in a different place, but don't surprise us because we have to plan,
Right.
because the leadership team is trying to plan successful process moving bills through all of the different stages, and
Mhm.
information is the primary currency. And so that particular bill, people were changing their votes on the floor, so we ended up pulling it back into committee for 6 weeks while we changed very little, but we socialized it better among the caucus.
Mhm.
Um and there were, some of those people calmed down and were able to support it, but over the weekend, between when I had counted them and when we brought it to the floor, the Vermont Police Chiefs Association was lobbying members really hard.
Okay.
And
Fair
people
enough.
were like, I don't want to go against my chief. And it's like, well, it's not unusual for law enforcement to have a particular lens. Your job is to evaluate the accuracy of that lens relative to the larger conversation about this policy change. And and when we had enough time to work with people on that and to show them, data that said it was popular in their district, or just, that we eventually got there. But there were some people, and this is where I started this thread, there were some people who never were going to be able to get there individually, even though their districts were actually provably supportive of
Mhm.
the policy change.
Mhm.
They personally couldn't vote for it, and they couldn't vote for it because it felt like it was state endorsement of drug use.
Uh, okay.
And
Fair enough.
and that was the way that they saw it, and it was like a no, no matter what. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the interesting part about this, right? Is like there's this collective action. Where is there a majority of votes that can move legislation forward? What does it take to craft the legislation to get that majority? But then also, how does that majority allow enough space for people to be individuals, to make the decisions that they need to make for themselves and for their constituents and for their perspective on what is the right policy. And then all of those layers come into play at each time, for everybody on hard votes. And I used to tell people that I don't care what your life experience is in terms of your work life or whatever, there's going to be some time here, if you spend any length of time here, it's going to be one of the hardest days of your lives. And
Mm-hmm.
you may not know it until it hits you,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to put pressure on you that you won't won't know until it happens. And um, that marijuana process was true for some people in that bill. Uh, we had done the biennium before. We did the first version of Vermont's Death with Dignity law.
All right. Yeah.
Um, that was uh, one of those votes for some people. That was extraordinarily difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we had for a bunch of the new members in this biennium, we had a flood recovery vote, an amendment that was offered by two members from very heavily flood impacted communities on the budget that they wanted to force us to go a specific direction. And there's a lot of, I could get into the weeds on that really quickly, but that's not as important as just to say that there were many members who wanted to go with them,
Mm-hmm.
who understood why that wasn't smart and why the appropriations committee had made the recommendation it did, which was not to do what they were asking.
Right.
Um, but they were literally in tears on the
Mm-hmm.
floor, or sort of shaking with the stress of saying, of going against what their instincts were, because they understood the larger reason, but it was so painful.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew how the flood impacted communities have been hurt by the floods. um, but like in that case, I'll just say, so people don't think it's totally vague, the issue is, um, we're likely to get a FEMA level flood event statistically every year.
Yeah.
And we're not, it's going to move around, and we're doing as much resilient work as we can afford to do to try to prevent it. But even in places, there are communities that have not done everything that they had a choice to do over the last couple of decades, that
Mm-hmm.
are actually experiencing more harms as a result of it, as we've now entered into this era of climate change induced flooding. And we said, if we're going to put future state dollars into flood recovery programs, we need to be sure that the communities involved are doing everything that they can to mitigate the risk of floods.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to understand what the ramifications are fiscally, because um, Vermont already does more flood support for municipalities than any other state in the country. And it used a minimum, we used, I think, close to $75 million this year. Uh, on 60 million of it was set aside for the FEMA match, for all of the FEMA payments. Most of that was directed to state buildings. So it's because we had $600 million of damage to state buildings. Um, but also we have a municipal match program, and we spent more money on that to support, to offset the municipalities' cost of making their own FEMA matches
Mm-hmm.
for FEMA recovery programs. And we have, so like we're doing more, and we're not insisting that come with towns doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to make this about any one town, which is why I'm being deliberately vague, but I can tell you that some of the flood impacted communities over the last few years of floods said that they didn't, they at the municipal level for decades chose to build in floodways when they were advised not to, didn't fully participate in the federal flood relief programs that they could have opted into, and then came to the state and said, now help us.
Right.
And that's all of that was in the mix. But this amendment was a highly emotionally charged amendment that didn't take any of that nuance into account and just would have put us in a particular, long-term box of the state agreeing to take more responsibility without any understanding of what is the shared responsibility, what are the fiscal implications, what happens if we have three flood events next year, to the larger budget, and are we prepared for the
Hmm.
ramifications of that? If we didn't have the money to keep most people housed in the emergency motel program, and 1,500 households were kicked out on the streets all at once because we had a commitment to flood to fund the flood relief program without any parameters on it, like that would be a really catastrophic thing in a different way.
Right.
And so appropriations, where I am, have been for the last 4 years, that's the kind of thinking that we have to do. And it doesn't mean that we all didn't want to find a way to be more helpful. It just meant that we couldn't do it on the fly. But that
Hmm.
was another example of where the caucus system was trying to say, like, you can't do this on the floor. It's not because it was power over, it was just like, this is why we do all of this process work. It's why committees weigh in. It's why we try to support the committees in their recommendations, because there's always things that need to be unpacked. And
Hmm.
when you do it all without that coherence, you're not going to make the best decisions.
Right. So, Tristan, thank you for that. And I really appreciate you drawing all those threads together because I feel, especially now, just around policy in general, we have so many complex issues that touch different parts of our government that the more we can tie things and the more we can do process work, um, it really makes a difference. We unfortunately only have a few minutes left, but I want to quickly touch on why you have chosen to step away after
Yeah,
12 years.
yeah.
And I know it's not a short answer, um, but I think the reason you're stepping down is actually rather important to talk about. So I'd love if we could at least touch on
Yeah, and I'll try to be quick.
it.
Um, so obviously you can tell I haven't lost my passion for the work. And so it's not about that in any way. And it's one of the limitations of the legislature that it was designed in a different era and funded with the assumption that we could be a very part-time citizen legislature. Um, where this isn't a job or a career, but it's something that you just do as community service. And the problem with that, and for the record, our salary for the year is about $13,000, and we get expenses paid at a certain amount, and if we don't spend all of that money, we can get a little bit more. But it's pretty rare for anybody to save enough money to do maybe more than 18,000 with the two combined. And we moved, for those of us who live far enough away, we moved to Montpelier for a minimum of 4 days a week. I was on appropriations for 4 years. We do half the session, we do Mondays. So, I was leaving Monday morning, 6 in the morning, and coming back Friday evening at 7. And so if you're needing to work, if you're in the middle of your career, so if you're younger, generally speaking, or not independently wealthy, like serving means that you're giving almost half of your year plus a whole bunch of volunteer time when you're back at home and not in session, um, for a very low salary, no benefits, and a lot of responsibility. And um, it has worked in many ways, but it also has meant that we're going to lose people who don't have retirement security, who can't afford to be without health insurance. If they lose their health insurance when they're not working full time, or they have, like if they might downsize from a full time job to a part time role that doesn't come with benefits. Well, that just means that what we're doing is we're limiting the diversity of the perspectives that are going to be in the building.
Mhm.
in the big picture, and it's why I and others have supported us trying to do more on the health insurance and salary side,
Mhm.
not to be getting rich doing it by any stretch, because I think the most ambitious proposal I think gets us up gets the legislators up to about 35,000 a year, but so nothing extraordinary, but something we've got to mitigate that harm. And for me, I spent 25 years in food service and then cobbled together those part-time roles around the legislature for the last 12 years. And I simply don't have any retirement set
Right.
up. And I'm
Well,
52
and the
years
wages you
old.
have earned will impact what you can earn in Social Security down the road too. And if you were only earning 13,000 for half the year, that really changes what you get in Social Security.
That's right. And so, I'm at the sort of tail end of what they're considered to be the peak earning years. I'm 52. I have 15 years really to figure out how to support my own financial security in the future. There was a sort of slight misquote that I want to correct. I'm not leaving to pursue wealth. I'm leaving to pursue financial security.
Mhm.
There's it's
There's
a
a difference.
distinction. It's a distinction that matters to me because ethically, I don't feel that I'm a wealth pursuer, but I think we all know that if we can save for our own retirements, we're going to have a safer and more secure retirement. And it's something we've actually done a lot of policy work around. We're trying to get the savings plans passed for all Vermonters to get like savings bond, because we know that the state has a role to play. We've tried to create pathways for people who don't have pension plans through their work to self-fund through a state program. So, like we're doing on the policy side and on the personal side, I'm in a situation now where I have an employer who wants me year round full time, that has the potential to be a reliable job for me for this next phase of my career. And I have a deficit of financial security that I have to
Mhm.
address.
Well, thank you for being upfront with that, Tristan. I think when it comes to the Vermont economy, it does not support a lot of people in many ways. And so the more we can talk about it, the more we can start seeing where we
Mhm.
need to make changes. And yeah, I think it's very interesting that that concept of citizen legislature, while I love it in my heart, I love the concept, I love the principles behind it. Um, it does, it raises questions. And when someone doesn't have financial security, that impacts the community as a whole.
Mm.
And so I think it does raise some bigger picture questions when you have 150 people every year who may not have that financial security in the long run. Um, we are out of time, but I just want to touch base and see if there's anything you wanted to leave listeners with before we head out.
Just gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to serve, for the vibrancy of the community that I live in and represent, and to the state and to our where we have been really bold and ambitious as a state, to try to make for a better future for Vermonters and to be responsive to climate change, and a whole lot of other issues, and also for where we aren't as strong as we can be. um, you know, I hope very much that we continue to evolve our understanding of what we can do, because as you said, the Vermont economy is not one where it's easy for everybody. There's a lot of wonderful benefits about being here, but there are ways that we're quite hard on ourselves, or quite unable to kind of bring people and our business models into uh, a level where people can thrive more easily. And it's not about getting rich, but it is about supporting our collective thriving. And I do agree with you. We need to constantly interrogate that. But gratitude, all directions, and for you.
Why, thank you, Tristan. If people wanted to get in touch with you or follow your work at least through January, how can they do that?
Yeah, the probably the best way is through the legislative website. I have a legislative email, Toleno, Ttol ENO at leg.state.vt.us. And there is a phone number that is directed to the Sergeant at Arms office, and they'll get me any messages that come in even out of session. They email us the messages or they mail them to us, and if they're long. So either way, you can reach me that way. And trying to think if there's any other good way. Uh, I'm out and about in the community, and I'm always open to the supermarket aisle conversations. 40 minutes, a tax policy in the co-op produce section not too long ago. Uh, you know, that's pretty much par for the course, and I'm happy to be there for people.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Hey, everybody. So the Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station, will return on Friday at 2 p.m. and is rebroadcast every Monday morning. I hope you all have a good weekend and take care.